today need, supposedly. And one of them was collaboration, and we'd all say, oh, yeah, I know, I've seen that. But it was within collaboration, the leaders that make a difference are the ones that celebrate failures, mistakes, right? So if we're going to invite people in to create these new ways of working and they don't work out right away, you can see what's going to happen. I told you so, right?
Back to the office.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And so just like, if you're listening, don't do that. The mistakes and the failures will glean insight, innovation, and creativity into other parts of your business, right? And at least then you have the data to make an informed decision.
Yeah, and I think what's so important in that statement that you just said is you can't build an environment of growth on failure if you don't have psychological safety. Like, you have to have that. So I think I love the idea of human skills. I call them essential skills of leaders today, and I certainly don't call them soft skills because they're not. They're so important. But things like empathy, building trust, those are all really important skills of leaders today that we don't actually train. We don't actually teach people how do you build an environment of trust. We don't teach people about empathy so that they actually live empathy. So those are the kind of things when I talk to my post-secondary colleagues who are in the teaching space, I'm like, that's leadership stuff. And we got to move into that space to make sure that we're really training the leaders of the future around these really important skills that we call human skills. But resting underneath that is the ability to say and live and breathe, this is a safe place for you to try. So imagine you're in a situation where you have a leader who says, yeah, no, I'm really all about you trying. I'm all about you doing this and giving it a shot. And then, you do something and why the heck did you do that? You get the slap on the hand or whatever. Well, you're not going to probably try that again, right? Like, it's not a safe environment for you to do so. So I think this is really probably one of the most important elements of leadership going forward. And today is how do we build a safe environment for our people?
Well, I'd love to dig into that and shift gears from, we've painted a bit of a picture of the current world of work now, right? What does it look like? And it's different than it was a couple years ago, and it's been accelerated by some forces like the pandemic. Mm-hmm. What are the implications of that for leadership? And so we've talked about some of these human skills or essential skills around safety and empathy. We would probably argue that power dynamics actually exists underneath of that layer, that things like trust and safety are outcomes of leaders who are able to see power and hold it and use it well, as opposed to unintentionally or accidentally. Doesn't really matter, but if the impact is negative, there's that intention impact gap that we talk a lot about. And so just to frame it up, what needs to shift in a lot of leadership, mainstream leadership or traditional leadership models and ideas, tools, all the things from your perspective? We've named a few, but what else is there for you?
Yeah. So the way that I would look at it is that we lead from how we were led in an organization, right? So our model of leadership is quite often the leader that has led us in different environments. And I've had the opportunity to work and lead in a variety of organizations and sectors through my career. And I've had some really phenomenal leaders who I aspired to be. They were my coaches. They were my mentors. They were phenomenal to work with. And then I've had leaders who I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never want to adopt that type of behavior. And you work against that as an emerging leader. So I think the implications for leadership are how we have led in the past. We need to do a little self-reflection as leaders to say that isn't necessarily how we need to lead in the future. And that when we look at the human skills that we've talked about, those are core elements of leaders of the future. And I think there's programs certainly that support the development of that. But I think what really supports that is the mentoring of that and ensuring that the leaders that we get to lead. It's a bit different if you're an emerging leader and this is your first step into it. But I think as leaders, as we lead other people, it's really our responsibility to lead them into the future with these new skills being core to how we lead in the future. And like I said earlier, what we're seeing now is that this is resulting in greater engagement of your employees, retention of your employees, I would argue, attraction of your new employees, because they want to be part of what's being created, and then obviously the productivity. So I think that the big implications for leadership is really looking at leadership very differently than how we've looked at in the past, and then designing the leadership development of your organization that works for you, with a core focus on these essential human skills that we talk about.
Mm-hmm. Now for you, Pablo, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the path to leadership, which, like to your point earlier, is an outcome. You can be in a leadership position or a position of role power, and your outcome or your impact as a leader, your leadership, might not be there.
Yeah.
And so, we see this with a lot of leaders now, and the amazing thing about the people we're working with is they're saying what got me here isn't going to get me where I need to go next. A lot of traditional organizations, you're there because you did a job very well,
mm-hmm.
and you performed based on certain metrics that were valuable to the organization at that point. I think those metrics are still there, but they're indirect. So they're a result of other metrics now,
mm-hmm.
right? Like we talk about learning and growth, creativity, innovation, right? Adaptive capacity, psychological safety, right?
Yep.
For us, these are the underlying behaviors and dynamics that we can impact to get even better metrics
mm-hmm.
for the team.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think leaders, if they can be aware of the path I took to get here, maybe isn't the path now that we need as a society, as an organization, and to say, like, I don't have to have the answers, because I don't. And so I'm going to bring in people that are, smarter than me in one area, or like, I think that's scary for some leaders to step away from what got them to where they're at, right? And because we hear some of these leaders now that have been promoted even higher up to say, like, we hear this word imposter syndrome, or I don't know what to do next. Yeah. And so they make decisions based out of fear of, I need to know this stuff. I need to be the one to do this work. And I think that's changing.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember a couple things come to mind. I remember when the pandemic started and I was working with my team, and one of my leaders came to me and said, literally these words, "What are we going to do?" And my answer as a leader was, gosh, I really don't know, because I don't know what this is going to look like. But what I can tell you and share with you is that whatever we do, we're going to do this together. Like, we're going to figure this out together. And so it became an experience of the team for us to navigate how we led our organization through the pandemic, and it was a great experience. We talk a lot about vulnerability being really important, and I think we need to understand what that vulnerability really means. But I think what's really important for leaders of today is to be able to be in the space of saying, I really don't know this, and I need some help. So whether it's you have a coach, or you have a peer, or whatever it might be, someone you can talk to, because the loneliest job in an organization is to be a CEO, because you have no one in the organization that you can talk to about the struggles that you're facing every day. So you got to think about a peer group or colleagues or whatever that you can bounce ideas off of. But I think that vulnerability piece is really important for leaders to be able to step into the space of being open to, I don't really know the answer to this, I need some help. But leadership, the example of leadership, to me, it starts really at the top of an organization. And it's really, it's the top leader, whether that be a team leader of an organization, of a team, or it be the CEO, is how you lead, is how that organization is going to lead. So if you're a CEO and you're embracing these new emerging human skills of leadership, what you're saying to your organization is that this is really important for us. If you're a leader that's embracing this as a team leader, what you're saying to your team is that this is really important. So you're giving your team the opportunity to kind of step into that space and being able to emulate what they see in their leadership. And I think when we look at the future of organizations, it really comes down to leaders being in that space of being vulnerable, being human. I struggle like you do. I'm trying to figure this out like you are. Let's do it together. Let's design this for our team. So I think that those are really important considerations for us as we think about developing leaders of the future. And it's often emulated by those who lead us.
Yeah, I think that piece there is leader as participant in the learning and growth, as opposed to, we've actually stopped saying that we'll just you can't hire us to come in and fix your team. Like that's not a thing we do, but that's a lot of leaders looking for the silver bullet or the fix for a problem, and they've already decided what the problem is. It's not them; it's something else, and come and help me fix it. So that humility, that vulnerability, there's something there to recognize that, and that was probably an unlock for me as a leader. It's like, I actually don't know. Like, I need to ask some help, right? Because the pressure of trying to know it all and trying to have all the answers, you can see it. I felt it in my own leadership practice. I feel it as a parent. Heck, having to have the answers for my kids, or what's next. That vulnerability of not knowing, I think, is one of those skills. When you talk about those essential skills, that humility and that vulnerability,
agree.
For sure. Let's get a little bit more tactical. Let's dig down into some of these pieces. We've mentioned some things, but I would love to know your go-to practices, your go-to frameworks, your pathways to help leaders. So you're a coach, and and as well as a leader in various sectors. From your experience, what are some of those practical things that you do to stay curious, to stay humble, to be vulnerable, to step into that unknown a little bit with your team? Do you have some examples or some?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I mean, it has been a practice. It's been a long time as I've worked it through. As I mentioned, I've been a leader for a number of decades, and so I came from that directive leadership space of command and control,
have the answers,
right? To have all the answers and tell the team what to do and all that stuff. To now, I'm much more of I would say an empathetic leader, where when I work with my own teams, it's about empathy and vulnerability, humility, and all those things. So I think there's a framework that I follow, and it's from fear to care. And the fear stands for frustration. The E is emancipated. There's not enough resources to do what I want to do. I feel withered and withdrawn. The A is I feel agitated. I just don't feel like I'm part of something. And the R is resign, right? So if I'm not getting what I need from the organization as a leader, I'm in a fear-based environment. And so what I like to do is to move people from that fear-based environment to really a compassionate based environment, or a care environment, I call it. So, compassion and competency and caring is C's, and the A really is about acceptance and agility. How do I become an agile leader that allows me to navigate change? Because when we think of today, it is what the pandemic has shown us. We will always be in an environment of disruption. We will always be in an environment of change. There will always be something that is going to challenge us as a leader. So how do we build ourselves, in that environment of agility? And then with that also is the R on care is resiliency. Is how do we develop an environment of resiliency and respect? Where we said it earlier, and I think it's an important thing to think about is, as a leader, how do we build community as leaders within an organization? There are people in your company or your organization that know things that you don't, or that have experienced things that you haven't. So how do we tap into that when we're thinking about building out our team? And then the E really is about encouragement and empathy. How do we build an environment where we encourage our people, we're empathetic with our people, not sympathetic, but we're empathetic with our people to help them, to show them that we understand. How do we step into that space? So I love the idea of let's move from what is really a fear-based environment into a care environment across an organization. And the principles that can be done at a team level, an organizational level. And I think that for me is a framework that I use when I'm having conversations with people and with leaders who are thinking about moving from, well, I'm here now. How do I get to here? And we'll get you there. I think we all have the ability to jump into these challenges. We all have the ability to create solutions with these challenges. Sometimes we need a peer. Sometimes we need a coach. Sometimes we need a mentor to help us kind of identify that. So I'm also a big believer in connecting with your broader based community. And then looking, I think I told you this over lunch, I'm reading a new book called The Leader is Healer. And I'm just fascinated by this book because a few years ago when I was president and CEO for CPHR Alberta, I was in a panel conversation with one of our speakers. We were talking about well-being and wellness. It was just at the start of the pandemic as we were navigating all this. It was a weird situation because I used to be used to stand in front of a crowd and all the members out there in the audience, and now I'm standing in front of a TV camera broadcasting to the internet. So it was kind of weird. And I was having a conversation with her, and this statement came to mind to me, which was, in order to lead well, we must be well. So as leaders, we need to put ourselves first if we're going to give the best to our teams and to our organizations. So those self-care practices that we have are really, really important. And I do a lot. I'm a runner. I do yoga every day. I meditate. I read. I feed myself first, knowing that in order for me to give the best to my team or to my clients or whoever it might be, I've got to make sure I take care of myself. And so those are really, really important. And so I want to make sure that when I'm working with other leaders, that they do that too, is that they put themselves first. And so identifying with them, what are the most important practices in your life that feed you and help you move through challenges and stress. The last thing we want is to pent up stress, because that doesn't help. It's not a great place to be. We know that there's illness related to that. So helping leaders understand stress and triggers and being able to move through that with the intention of giving themselves the best of themselves, but also giving their teams the best of themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And we often say that self-care is not optional, it's ethical.
100%.
So when you think about power, and we think a lot about power around here and how it shows up, but we're most at risk of misusing whatever power we do have in a system, whether it's formal leadership power or less formal. We're more likely to misuse it when we're not well ourselves, because we're going to center our need for wellness, or our stress is going to leak out in unhealthy and unhelpful ways. And I think that, again, to ground this in practice, it's, some of it is that yoga or that running or the meditation or the journaling. And some of it, we talk a lot about boundaries.
I was just going to say
setting boundaries as probably the underpinnings of self-care, is being able to establish those psychological, relational, whatever boundaries you need to protect the power that you do have and the space that you do have. I think is self-care. I put some air quotes. People can't see me, and we're obviously on audio, but self-care gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes, or a little bit of a surface level piece where it's actually, what's the purpose of self-care? It's so that we have the energy and the power that we need to make the impact we want to have in the world.
100%. And I was going to talk about boundaries too, because I think as a leader, the one thing that we can do is that we can live our boundaries. So we need to identify what those boundaries are, but we can then live those boundaries as examples for our team to follow. So if I end up saying that my boundary is that I don't work on the weekend, yet you get an email from me on Sunday night, I'm sending the wrong message to you.
How often does that happen? That incongruency between what we say we value and our behavior.
Totally. Yeah. And our team I remember once I had a it wasn't long ago, I had a team member say to me, "Yeah, Rod, I know this is important to you, but here's what happens to me if you do that. If you do that, you're telling me that my boundaries now are not important because your boundaries are not important to you." And I thought, that's really, really powerful. So I think, and that means that person felt they were in a safe environment, that they could actually come and share that with me. But I thought, yes, sometimes that the really important thing for a leader of today is that self-reflection. What impact am I having on my team with the behaviors that I'm doing today? And then what are the opportunities for me to change so that I can have a more positive impact on my team in the future? And I think those are the kind of things we need to instill in our leaders for the future.
I'm going to take us off script here for a second.
Okay. Oh, we didn't have a script. Where's the script?
No, there is no script.
I got a story after I want to come back to.
There are some topic areas, but the other piece, so self-care is ethical. Can't lead well unless you are well. Yeah. Those are really important pieces. The other piece, like an essential skill set, is the ability to receive and give effective feedback. And it sounds like you, in that moment, that person who reported to you, their safety was there to be like, "Hey, Rod, how is this congruent with that value?" And you're like, "Yeah, you're right, it wasn't." Not a lot of leaders actually have healthy feedback mechanisms in their organization. And so the question here is a piece of feedback that's stuck with you for a long time. It could be a positive or constructive piece of feedback, but something that really had an impact for you when you were in a leadership role. And you're like, "Oh yeah, that was a turning point for me, this moment of feedback."
Gosh, that's a good question. I might have to throw it to Pablo as I reflect on
Sure.
some of those.
I could share my story because it's a recent one while you think of
Sure.
that.
Sounds good.
So I'm just, how much do I divulge here? This is a generic story. So I know of a leader. I know him quite well. And they recently lost a really great person on their team. And I've gotten data or feedback from people around him around, and I've also got his version of the story. And so let me paint the picture. Someone leaves, and they find out why at the exit interview, like most organizations. And the reason is, I love the leader. I care about them. They care about me. I've got to do a lot of work here, but I watch what they do, and I can't do that. And if that's the behavior I need to do to get there, I'm out. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And when I talk to the leader, this is the intention versus impact gap. I want to show them I'm working just as hard, if not harder. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That I'm putting it in here for them. Mm-hmm. And so the intention is to show I'm here with you, but the impact of that behavior is that this is what you need to do to be successful here. Mm-hmm. And you lose some great people. When in reality, that he didn't expect that of that individual, right? But they never had this conversation. So it makes me, back to your point, Jeff, someone felt safe enough to come and maybe challenge something that you had done and give you feedback on it. And I think that's what's missing is we hear this so much. I have an open door policy. And most of the time they're great people. Like, I look at some of my friends, I'm like, you're the best friend, loving, caring. It as a boss, you're so different, right? Like you're not, and so what, I think this is what Jeff was getting at. What have you done to create that space that people can come and challenge you on your own things? And then I won't forget his second question was, what's the most, would you call it pinchy or
impactful feedback?
Yeah. So let me I might need a poke from you just to kind of remember the second word, but let me address your question first, Jeff, that you had mentioned. And I took over a large organization in a larger organization a number of years ago, and I had this wonderful EA. So when you think about the relationship, and it's a power relationship between an executive and an EA, and I was doing some things that wasn't sitting well with her. One of them was I wasn't giving her enough time, and I was building a team and very busy and managing some big stuff, and so she came into my office, and she said, "I'm really frustrated by you because you're not giving me the time that I need." And so I could have taken this down a couple directions. I could have said, "Well, that's too bad. Go out and do your job," which I didn't do. I said, "Okay, let's sit down and talk about it. What am I doing that's causing you frustration? Because that's the last thing I want to do. I want us to figure out how to work together." And so she shared with me that she said, "Sometimes I feel when I come and sit with you to talk about what we're going to work on, I feel like I'm being rushed and I'm not being seen." And I said, "Wow, that is not my intention at all to do that. But that is the impact that I was having on that person." And so through the conversation, it was wonderful. And we just opened up the space to just kind of let this all come out. And it was very respectful. And I could say it was challenging for me to hear this. There's no question. I'm hearing this. And so my takeaway on it was, okay, what can I do for you that helps you feel seen in the conversations that we have? Well, here's what we can do. We can make sure that you're not so rushed. We can make sure that you have set aside time for me to do this, formal, informal time. Similar open door policy, but sure, come on in, but I got 2 minutes kind of thing. So I'm not going to see you. I'm just going to, kind of rush you out. And so we designed an alliance of how we're going to work together. And that was very powerful for me because then I knew there was an expectation and an accountability to how we're going to work together. And it became one of the most productive relationships that I had. And I love the example because it wasn't a peer. It was someone who was, junior to me. And power, right? And it was a power dynamic. And so I had to really kind of disperse that power differently in the relationship. So for me, that would, if I was to give you an example, Jeff, that would be the example that I would give where I got the feedback that I need to get. Now, Pablo, what was the other?
Yeah. So Mike, let's use this example. With this individual, I have an assumption here that they didn't wait until they could have quit, right? Waited till that point, wherever that point was going to be, right? Yep. But they chose to come and approach you. Now, sure, maybe there's an individual personality power at play, but from the sense I get from you is you have been creating space for this. There's behaviors, there's whether it's what you communicate, how you behave, that have allowed people on your team to feel safe to challenge you on those things and give you feedback. What do you think are some of those things that you do?
Well, so there's a couple things. One is certainly the behaviors that I would have is I'm putting away what I'm currently doing, right? It's even as simple as turning towards the person and making eye contact, right? So it's not, oh, okay, I hear you, and I'm on my phone or I'm typing on my computer.
By the way, we see that so much.
Oh,
So
I'm having flashbacks to a leader I worked with several years ago who could not put her phone down, and it had a tremendous impact. Unintentional, for sure. But
yeah. My wife and I have this kind of saying. It's a take on intimacy. It's into me you see. So when I sit with someone in that moment, especially when it's a challenge or it's a conflict or whatever, it is about at that moment in time, I want you to feel like you're the only person that matters. Nothing else matters. No phone, no email. I'll turn towards you. We'll have a conversation. We're going to work it through. I want you to feel like you're seen. And so that's a behavior that I would certainly do. Leadership can be tough, and at times it can be emotional. To your point, Jeff, earlier in the conversation, we have pressures that come down on us, and we need to manage that and the stress around that. So in those moments of conflict, it's also holding emotions in check. Not that you're not going to be non-emotional, right? But you're going to just make sure that the right emotions are being used genuinely. And I never condone anger or anything like that, but I just think it's important to say, okay, how am I feeling right now? What do I need to move through in this moment? And it's kind of an immediate impact. What do I need to move through right now in this moment as a leader to kind of let go of? Maybe I need to let go of judgment. Maybe I need to let go of this person challenging me. They're pretty hot under the collar. I know what happens if I get hot under the collar. We're not going to achieve anything together. So I'm going to let that just kind of flow through me. So I think it really is centered around that self-reflection of your role in the dynamic and in the relationship, and being able to put aside those things that could cause some challenges as you're navigating some of these conversations.
Yeah, I would say you've got a mechanism for doing this, or some people do breathing to get grounded. You were talking about fear, care. We've got at risk, at stake. It sounds like you're able to ground yourself at what's at stake here, and how do I need to show up to get the best outcome here with this individual or this team.
Yeah.
And so is that something that is it coming more natural to you? Is it something that you consistently have to, like, you've got to, okay, this is this, boom, ground myself?
Yeah, so 100%. Would I say it comes natural? No, it's work. And it's a lot of self-work. It's self-work through my own coach. It's self-work through, my wife and I, we both kind of share the same background in terms of what we do for organizations. So it's having those talk-throughs with her and tapping into her wisdom and her experiences. And so it is a journey. I mean, I think I look at it and go, there is no, to your point, Jeff, earlier, there's no silver bullet that comes in and kind of fixes this all. But I think the core here is, for me, leadership really is, it's a journey of self-discovery, right? Of who you are as a human and how you lead as a human in an environment that is very dynamic and always changing. So to me, it's like, I always learn something new about leadership every single day in my own work, but also in what I read or whatever. And I just think be prepared. If you're going to be a leader, be prepared to be on a journey, because there's not an end point. It is consistently changing, because the environment that you're in is consistently changing. And at the root of it is knowing yourself as a person first, and knowing yourself as a leader second, because it comes down to the core of who you are as a human being.
Nice. Love that.
Awesome. That feels like a little bit of a mic drop moment.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Well,
Yeah. We've heard visions talked about that way, right? A vision isn't a destination, it's a journey. But what I love about that is leadership is a journey. It's you might get a title, and that might have been your goal to get there. But does that mean you stop being a leader at that point?
Well, I think the core of that, it's a great point, Pablo. I think at the core of that is really, I mean, whether you're a leader or not, at the end of the day, it's really about how am I developing myself? What am I doing to invest in myself as my roles change or as the environment changes, and constantly being aware of what are the opportunities to do things, to learn things that make you a better leader.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I think that moment-to-moment awareness and presence and consciousness, really, of both power but also responsibility, right? So when you talk about that leader, it doesn't help if I get hot under the collar too. Like, nothing good happens if we're both, your role as a leader in that is to be conscious of that environment and the conditions that you're creating for that exchange or for that communication or whatever it happens to be. And so I think that in a world, I know for myself, I struggle with that being actually present in the moment. There's so many demands on our attention, whether those are internal demands of just the to-do list and the stressors and all the things, right? Mortgage payments to who knows what, to the demands of the environment that we're in. And you talked about having to buffer your team before, but do we buffer ourselves from that stress, or are we reactive and coming from that place, that fear versus care? Again, it's really easy to accidentally find yourself on the fear side of the spectrum and acting in the moment to keep yourself safe or to address that. Yeah,
and we can really get stuck in that fear place. And I think if we look at the experience of the last couple of years it is really easy just to kind of stay there, right? Because it's around you. So I think helping people move from fear to care is really, really important. I think the other thing that I would share, that when we look back on kind of the practices and the implications, and you raised this, Jeff, was understanding the systems at work within an organization. So knowing that an organization is structured a certain way, and it's often structured from an organizational design perspective by hierarchy. But as a leader, and I wouldn't say this is a political thing, it's understanding how those systems interplay in the organization. Then how do you as a leader engage in those systems to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve? And it really means taking a systems thinking approach to the dynamics of an organizational environment.
Yeah, so much here. There's a round two conversation around organizational and team design and leadership development, because I think we're getting in our work to a place where those things are so tightly interconnected that if we're really wanting to move the needle on the employee experience in this new world of work, that we're going to tackle both of those things. Yeah. It's one thing to try and rehabilitate leadership inside of a command and control hierarchical structure. It's another thing to actually take a look at our organizations and our teams and say, are these actually structured the way that is effective? Do they distribute power enough to alleviate some of these symptoms and challenges that we're facing? There's a big conversation I think that could be had.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree, and I kind of look at it, and I think there's this tension that exists right now as we're navigating out of the experience of the pandemic. Is what does that organization of the future? There's a pull to the future, but there's also kind of a pull to what was normal for people before or what we used to do. And I think the opportunity for us right now is to take a look at what's possible. What can we design for organizations today that allow us to build teams, people, and organizations that are agile, that can adapt to change quickly, that are excited about the opportunities, that are engaged in the future? I mean, that's, to me, where we need to go as we think about the traditional themes of organizational design and hierarchy. We need to kind of blow that up. I think it no longer necessarily serves an organization. And I've talked about this with other organizations around the constraints, even as simple as a job description, right? So here's your job description. Well, that meets a certain kind of competency framework that you want for the role. But what about the other skills that individual brings to the organization that can be captured and leveraged? And how do you unleash those skills within the organization? And I think we need to think differently about how we structure some of the things that we have in work. These constructs of work that we have need to be re-looked at and, in some cases, actually blown up and redesigned.
Definitely a round two conversation.
Well, yeah. I'm in.
We'll have you back. Any go-to books, resources, authors, podcasts, anything that someone listening can jot down quick and go find? Things that have been influential?
Well, I certainly think that I would, and I'm in this right now, is Leader is Healer, I think is a great book. And so I would leave that with people today. Definitely your podcast is awesome. I love the work that you both do around power in organizations. And I would definitely say, link into those podcasts. At the Table by I think it's At the Table by Patrick Lencioni, I think is another good one for understanding and learning. And I'll have to think about other books and I can send them to you. Off the top of my head, I don't have any.
No, that's perfect. That's a great list, and we'll throw them into the show notes and
Awesome.
on LinkedIn, and people can find them there. So, Rod, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and lots to discuss and lots of food for thought for both Pablo and I and our listeners. So
Awesome. It was
you.
great. Thanks for letting me be here today. It's great.
That was great seeing you and hanging out with you and getting to know more about your story. I learned so much more. Okay.